Hello and welcome to the 2 Minute Warning. I'm your host, Perry Busby. Thank you for joining us once again. We look forward to sharing another evening with you with some topics that are near and dear and can help us grow. Tonight, my co-host tonight is my co-host tonight is none other than Mr. Bobby Henry, the publisher of the West Side Gazette, which sponsors the 2 Minute Warning each week, and we are excited uh, to have this platform to share with you. Good evening, Bobby. How you doing, my brother?
Good evening, Perry. I'm doing well, man. But into each life a little rain must fall. Understanding
Exactly.
that though, but had it not been for the rain, the flowers wouldn't grow. So
Exactly.
it's like a two-edged sword. And
Yeah.
uh, we received some devastating news this week. And I know it's like every day we get things that come across our desk or come across our TV screen that really punches us in the stomach. But this week was extremely difficult when we found out that one of our own, one of our native sons, a very true soldier in the meaning of that word soldier, one who was willing
Hmm.
to give up his life,
Right.
transitioned, and that was our brother, our friend, Congressman Al C. Lamar Hastings. And in an article in the paper, one of our writers, Miss Audrey Peterman, Audrey so eloquently uh, gave us a summation to just a little bit of what Congressman Hastings meant to us. And she said this, if I would. Son of the soil, Congressman Al C. Hastings departs this life, unabashed, unafraid, unapologetic, filled with love and compassion for the people he served, always striving to make a difference and succeeding in superlative ways. And I would like to add to that he would go through hell and high water for you. He would do everything he could for the constituents in his district and beyond. He was
Hmm.
unapologetically black and proud, and he would
Hmm.
never, ever forget where he came from, nor would he let anybody else. He stood tall against adversities. He went through hell and came out unscathed and for the better of it. So I know that his shoes, his seat, his ability to serve will be hard to find somebody that could fit the shoes in an appropriate manner. But we know somebody's out there. We just got to find them. So, to Congressman Hastings' family, to his staff, to his friends, and even to those who despitefully used him, uh, our prayers go out to the family and our condolences. And may the congressman rest comfortably in the arms of other soldiers. One in particular was his roommate at Fisk, Congressman John Lewis. So I know they are up there in heaven and strategically planning a way to try to make it better for us here. So to Congressman Hastings, my friend, God bless you and rest in peace. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, I had one opportunity to meet Congressman Haston, and that was through you. Uh, it was a memorable moment, just because uh, before I met him that day, all I ever knew about him was sound bites from the news or YouTube, and he had plenty of those that I love. He was good for making a sound bite.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but that day, I saw him talking to the leaders, the African American leaders here in Broward, and man, talk about uh, a memorable moment. Just one of those moments I was glad to be a fly on the wall.
Hmm.
Um, and just listen, some of the sage wisdom that he said that day sounded more like a Moses talking to the leaders. He acknowledged, uh, the cancer, and even said, yeah, I'm past it, but cancer's always in my body now.
Hmm.
And he acknowledged it. And from that day on, I've sort of looked at the leadership, not just here in Broward, but our leadership nationally, uh, in terms of what those soldiers, those
Hmm.
true soldiers, he
Mm-hmm.
and John Lewis. I mean, because Alcie's dad was a great man in his own right,
Mm-hmm.
and so to pick up that baton and continue to advance it, I think that is the challenge we have today. I mean, we are the heirs of that, but it's not just enough to be an heir. I mean, we got to progress.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to ask ourselves about that progress. But uh, Congressman Hastings, it was a funny moment because we did the interview and we didn't get the audio, man.
But we got it. We got the video.
We got it. We got it. And he was gracious enough
Yeah.
to to say, guys, when you get your stuff together, come back, come back, and we'll try it again.
You know, and he was that kind of person, man. It was like his whole mission was to make you feel good. You know, he
Right.
did everything he possibly could to try to big you up, if you will.
Right.
That was who he was. We were fortunate enough that we had the opportunity, because of Congressman Hastings, to be a part of Barack Obama's inauguration. I was in the building and received an autographed copy of Barack's presidential address to the country
Mm.
because of Congressman Alcee Hastings. That's just the kind of person he was. He wanted you to feel good, you know, and to make somebody else feel good. That's who he was, and
Yeah.
I will never forget that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
And so we move on. I mean,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and so not only does the Broward community, the Sistrunk area who he
Hmm.
served uh, for 15 terms. Um, Not only do we have to move on, so does Florida, so does Washington, and so we get to play a part of that.
Yeah.
Uh, and so we've got some issues. I know he would be very much at the forefront of this voting issue, as
Hmm.
well as uh, we had some breaking news today with the Biden administration and gun violence,
Hmm.
and I'm sure he would be at the forefront of that and how that impacts us,
Hmm.
even here.
Absolutely.
You know.
Yeah. It's ironic though, man, how um, his college roommate at Fisk, John Lewis, man, Congressman,
Wow. How did?
how strange, or um, how I don't know. It's just the fact that these two giants, these two men who would dare uh, uh, to stand up and take a blow, if you would, both of them, brothers and sisters, they left here from pancreatic cancer. So that tells us, let's please, please
Mhm.
take care of your health. Go to the
Right.
doctor. Go check yourself out. If something feels strange, go do it. You know,
Right.
yeah, man.
Yeah.
So it's so
Yeah.
much. Hmm.
Yeah. 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 We really stand at a uh, critical point.
Yeah,
Uh, you know, not just COVID, but as life moves on, and
yeah.
so as they say, I mean, you always want to hit that home run, but when they say batter up, you start looking around scared.
Ooh, I'm on deck.
Right,
Yeah,
you on that.
yeah, yeah. I'm on deck. Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that bat feel a little heavier.
Yeah, get a little heavier. Vanessa Byers, what's happening? I see you tuning in, and that's great. Thank you,
Yeah,
classmate. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
okay.
But
Hmm.
as I said, Bobby, man, uh I'm really excited about this show tonight. Not
Hmm.
I know it sounds kind of morbid, not to be excited, but one thing that we try to do on the 2 minute warning is not to just do feel good subjects.
Hmm.
We want to talk about the things that either sometimes we get too polite and whitewash it, or we just don't want to really address some of those ills. Uh, but they're not going away.
No.
As much as we want to pray for you know since Columbine and before, gun violence is here in our communities, and it's impacting us in so many different ways.
Mm.
They talk about mass killings, but you was telling me today about about a
Okay.
football player, right?
Yeah, the ex NFL player Philip Adams. He committed suicide after he killed 5 people in South Carolina. Amen.
Wow.
So when we look at the news and just if we go through our well, for those who live in inner city or uh, not necessarily inner city, there was I was I guess I'm rambling now, but it jumped out at me. One dead, four were critically injured in the shooting. A girl that's 9 years old, she hid in the cupboard as her dad killed her mom and 2 other sisters. It's all over the place, Perry. All over the place.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. Well, and that's why I said I feel good, because as depressing, as frustrating, as tiring,
Mm.
and I use tiring specifically because we have a tendency when we don't want to hear something, we become numb to it, and so uh, I want to push that scab tonight,
Hmm.
and so I'm excited to have two qualified guests, uh, people who are true soldiers.
Hmm.
They on the front lines of this, and so uh, going to let you go first with our guest. But
Okay.
tonight, our topic is caught in the crossfire
Yeah.
and how gun violence is impacting our community.
Absolutely. And I'm honored to have the privilege of introducing our first guest. Um, I met this lady via one incident from another brother, and said, "Bobby, you need to call the best attorney that I know of." As a matter of fact, she's one who never lost a case. She doesn't bite her tongue. Of course, her tongue is glibbed with the knowledge of uh, biblical scripture, and it guides her throughout her process. So I am honored to introduce attorney Rossi Williams out of Miami, Florida. She never lost a case. Mm-hmm.
Hello, hello,
Congratulations. Yeah.
and
Oh, hello,
hello
attorney Rossi.
for
Hello.
everybody.
Hello. I'm glad Glad for
It's
you to
very
join
good to
us.
be here.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I am happy to be here. Thank you very much.
great, great.
Mhm.
Uh, our second guest tonight um, is a forensic psychologist, Dr. Ron Kennedy Bailey. He serves as the assistant dean of clinical education at the Charles R. Drew University and is the chief medical officer of Kindred Health Systems. Uh, Dr. Bailey has spent years uh, focusing on the treatment of chronically mentally ill, forensic, and violence assessment and health disparities. Uh, Ron is a graduate of the esteemed Morehouse College. He received his medical degree from the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston. And I could go on and on with the accolades of Ron, but the one accolade that makes him very unique to me is that he has been my friend since kindergarten. And and that means a lot because I don't have very many friends, and they getting away from here.
Mhm.
But welcome, Dr. Ron Kennedy Bailey.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Mhm. You mean
Nah.
you've been knowing this guy since kindergarten?
Kindergarten. Well, he was smart then. I'm sure he's smart now.
Oh, wow, man. Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that I'll send a check on that one. Ron is being real kind.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay,
Uh,
Miss Rossi, tell us just a little
Yes,
bit about you. You know, I know it's a couple of things that I know,
sure,
but share just a little bit. Hmm.
sure. I became an attorney due to my brother's incarceration. So I definitely know how it feels to sit on the other side of the desk. Prior to that time, and still today, I was a registered nurse, so I obtained my bachelor's in nursing from the great Tuskegee University, and my
Hmm.
law degree is from FAMU. I also
There it
served in the
is.
military, the Army
Hmm.
straight out of high school, and there I obtained my nursing scholarship to Tuskegee University. I am definitely a licensed minister, and so I love God with all my heart. So I have been able to take what God not only has given me, but what He has purposed me to do, to be able to advocate for the justice of those in need. My office is Rossi Williams Law Group, located in Miami, but we have served clients throughout the entire state of Florida. I am also chair of the Religious Affairs Committee for the Miami-Dade NAACP and previously served on legal redress. So I am all over the place. And I was named 2021 Lawyer of Distinction in Civil Litigation. So you could just go to my website and see all of those things on callrossywilliams.com. But the most important thing to know about me tonight and in life is that I know my purpose and I know my call and I walk in both of them in doing what I do.
great, great,
Thank you, thank you.
great.
Mhm.
And so, uh, Ron, as I said, is a forensic psychologist, and first of all, he's written a new book that talks about this issue. Uh, and so, Ron, what give us some feedback as well as your book and what it entails about the issue of gun violence in our communities.
Certainly, it's been mentioned I'm a forensic psychiatrist. So, throughout my medical career, I've been focused on issues of medical legal conflict, and very often that in psychiatry um, creates the overlap with the issue of violence. When persons are violent to themselves, suicide, they're hospitalized, or at risk of hurting others due to paranoia or fear. Um, those issues very often come to psychiatry for behavioral interventions and often medication management to limit further ongoing conflict and difficulty. The forensic side of what I've been involved in throughout my career, now you're right, 30 years, since med school, University of Texas in 1990, has been conducting evaluations and eventually making opinions or writing reports or testifying in court or trial or what have you on issues regarding very often criminal action or actions that may or may not violate rules of society or actual violate laws. So I'm very involved, I think, in that piece and have tried throughout my career to bring an element of fairness that assists, I think, the court system in finding justice in these matters, because all too often we've seen that happen just the opposite in some groups based on demographics or their age. Young blacks and browns often are not being treated fairly in these settings of many disciplines. Mine, being a psychiatrist, is one that's wholly underrepresented when it comes to African American persons on this side, I think, of the aisle. I wrote the book, Perry, I think, and also Mr. Henry, because as I've been involved in it for so long, I just kept seeing elements of unfairness and mistreatment and a story or narrative that just really wasn't discussed correctly. We talk a lot about home. And Peter Busby, I'm from Beaumont, Texas, and I grew up across the street from one of the most powerful people in Beaumont, Texas, a very popular man named Boy Brown, and he was kind of mysteriously killed in the hands of the police when I think I was, not killed, but harmed and paralyzed when I was a young child, and that stayed with me and many of my neighbors for many, many years. So this aspect that so many of us have unfortunately been exposed to gratuitous violence, in our own communities, often by individuals who are supported by and protected by the government. Law enforcement or government and taxpayer paid. Certainly, I think has created, similar to the Attorney Williams to make the point, a life experience that actually points in the direction of trying to work in this area to create an element, I think, of fair balance.
Mm-hmm. Attorney Williams, Brother Ron made a couple of points, and I noticed that you kind of what point of his conversation that really caught your attention on your legal side?
I would really, yes, two things. Number one would be the lack of equality in the criminal justice system and those ramifications that we see. I would definitely say for my clients that I see, because I represent 3 practice areas and one of them is criminal defense. And so that, as well as the impact on life experiences. You see, what happens a lot of times is that in relation to gun violence, and our young people or the people whom I represent, a lot of times they see themselves in a vacuum in regard to the situation. And not only the fact that they've been arrested in a vacuum, but just dealing with that one particular offense in a vacuum. When the truth is that it's not in a vacuum. Every interaction or engagement with law enforcement is going to affect that individual personally, it's going to affect their family, and number 3, it's going to affect the community. And because it is a cascading impact that impacts those 3 areas continuously, then you get into the life experiences. That one decision that you made to engage with the justice system now is overarching throughout your entire life and every decision that you make. So those 2 points really, really jumped out at me. In the state of Florida, we have about 50 prisons, 50 state-run prisons, and I think there are about 7 private corporation-run prisons. And as of last year, we have a total of about 81,000 inmates. This is according to the Florida Department of Corrections last strategic and annual plan. Of those, approximately 40% are Black males. So when you think about that and you take those numbers and you think about the fact that these people are incarcerated, now everywhere they go, that incarceration is on their record. Every place that they want to move into, there's a background check. If you want to get a job where you need to care, then there's a background check. If you need to get a weapon, there's a background check. If you want to vote, even with the passage of Amendment 4, You cannot vote unless all of your sentence has been completed, including the payment of fines. The parents come in and pay for the representation. So throughout the lifespan, that one interaction with the justice system, it never goes away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I understand we face this as always with some duality. Uh, and I guess for me, I'm always uh, the analytical one. So so I'm trying to understand, how did we get here?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not as if guns became, I mean, at some point, guns became a new phenomenon in a way that I think took a lot of us by surprise. I mean, I have some friends who don't just have a gun, they have arsenal. And and so how do we understand this? Because I know we can get caught in this whole big debate around the Second Amendment and the well-armed militia, which is another issue altogether about being a militia anyway. But how did we get here? I mean, with this proliferation and this wanton desire.
Let me jump in on that. I think that's really the ethereal question of the book that I put out in 2018 that you spoke about. I, as a psychiatrist, tried to think about over the course of my career, persons have stated in numerous individual and group sessions discussing what are issues. I mean, so certainly first and foremost, I think we have a country with a history that has, I think, unfortunately, more than fortunately, made the argument that the way to be a country and assert your identity and emphasize your independence is via the gun. Our language and our constitution, our bylaws talks a lot more about congeniality and democracy and freedom and the idealism, I think, of the human spirit. But it was really the power of the gun and the mistreatment of others that I think really stands to address the rubric, I think, of the underpinning of American history. Over time, though, we've had just really a plethora of other laws and rules and regulations that are promulgated the same. They've emphasized race. There are times when a person who's African American, for example, couldn't have a gun or have one legally, and others could. They've also, I think, emphasized the use of guns and violence and warlike actions against persons who think our society has devalued, not just ethnically blacks, women as well. Very often a man could be a power and what have you, have control over their wife, hospitalize their wife, or simply commit them, or use guns in those settings to threaten them, if you will, in ways that society didn't always stand up for those who are less powerful. In that case, women, from a gender perspective. My book speaks about maybe 4 or 5 key overarching things, though, that I mentioned. One, we discussed the fact that the gun by itself is the problem. I heard your point about the Second Amendment, and often when I give this lecture, much of the heckling you get is, well, we're the Second Amendment, and that tends to, somehow for some undermine the academic argument and the empirical argument of how we kind of got to this point. Second Amendment certainly in no way allows persons to have weapons that are likely to harm everybody. Otherwise, you could just buy a tank and drive down the street and blow buildings up or whatever. Clearly, there's got to be some threshold for what the Second Amendment allows in a free and civilized society. In addition, though, we really have not been allowed, due to political reasons, to use the technology that we actually have. We have biotechnology now that would prevent a gun from working if you bought it in the program, all it will work for you with your fingerprint, for example, or some biotechnological aspect. That would probably, if we enforce that politically, decrease a lot of these mass shooters. Somebody buys a gun, somebody else steals it, and it's used separately, but other than the person who actually purchased it. So many of them gun reform laws that so you can't buy a gun for so much time when you have the hot period, when you're angry or what have you, or many will argue, well, they don't really matter because somebody used the gun anyway, but maybe use someone else's gun. So the laws we could use or evidence we could imply or enforce, would be very helpful. The third and final part I mentioned in this report is the fact that, we have blocked doing research in this area. There was called the Dickey Amendment. Dickey was a congressman out of Arkansas, 1996 to push through legislation through this period where we just arguing everything was pro-gun, pro-gun, pro-gun. So now we actually limit how much federal government monies can be spent for a researcher like myself to research on gun violence and to produce data on gun reform. So when you hear what the president said today in regards to executive actions, they're often that's followed on news channels by data. And there's really less new data because we haven't done as much research. So we've actually gone all the way up in the food chain to limit doing research that might show how limiting access to guns, making guns not so powerful, not having these high magazine, machine-like type guns, if you will. All those kinds of things, I think, are part of an overarching process. I think Perry Busby said it very correctly. So this is a multifactorial concern that's going on for a long period of time. Many people not really knowing what the empirical data says just support it, I think, without factual basis. All issues that I think combine to put our country and our individuals at risk. I think they put our liberties at risk. I think they should change.
Okay, so let me understand. So you're saying that to build a bigger, better mousetrap doesn't work in this situation.
Well, clearly, I think that there's got to be some rationale and some reason and some limits. Mm-hmm. And I think Perry Busby said earlier, you do that even more so. They both stated it when you're having, adverse results. I mean, I'm a physician, and in healthcare, the concept is that we look in many regards at what creates the greatest degree of risk, healthcare risk, and less safety. It doesn't take a physician or all of society can appreciate that nowadays somebody can just walk into a public setting, a store, for example, with a rapid fire machine gun like a high magazine capacity is called weapon, and you can harm many, many people. The person in Las Vegas shot 500 people and killed 50. I think somebody in Denver that they shot and killed 10. I mean, the numbers are great. Other than decreasing all freedom in your society, where every place is going to have a metal detector. How else do you get around it other than having some other types of moderating laws and rules that limit access, but also limit the gun itself from being so powerful? And I think also have a pro-education movement so persons can realize that you're not necessarily more safe because you have a gun. Perry's point was very clear. There's these three types of person when it comes to guns in our society. Those who have no gun, for whatever reason, you choose not to, or you can't afford it, or your religion, or whatever. Those who have one gun, many who choose to do that directly, and they train and safety to protect themselves. And then there's these so-called gun enthusiasts, and they average now about 17 guns per person. The ones who are gun enthusiasts. So that's why there are more guns in America now, 380 million than people, 350 million. Not numbers that are consistent with or portend toward a safe society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Unmute, Perry. Unmute. Mm-hmm.
One of the things I see in this is that when we talk about the psychology and the mental framework around this issue, is either about understanding the person that perpetrated the crime, or we're coming to a sense that, well, if this person doesn't fit the model of the blazing gun ranger, then he's mentally ill. And I think in between those extremes, there is a lot that goes on. I mean, if we keep getting all of this gun violence, at some point, don't you think that I'm not mentally ill? I just kind of, you're going to have this person who thinks that's the way I solve problems now. I mean, because we see it in the hood. We see young boys solve a problem only to create a bigger problem. Right. And so how do we solve? And that's part of America just as well. I mean, whether you want to call it Tarzan or whatever, the Anglo uses gunpowder, to exact power and fear.
Yeah,
and
I like the point. I just because I like the points because I think that again it speaks to the data. We cannot say enough in psychiatry, in every area of medicine. That's why it's considered a public health problem now, not just by the American Psychiatric, but also by the American Medical Association going back to 2016. We cannot make the point enough that one is not more safe because they have a gun. And I get the biggest arguments when I state this to people, to share data. I can send emails, I can send articles. I've written some articles in this area. But persons who have guns are not less likely to die at the hand of a gun or their family be a victim of a violent crime. Persons who very often are untrained, very often safety issues are lacking, more likely to have access to their homes, so their relatives are more likely to be killed with a gun in their own home. Children very often who can access a gun that's already loaded and there's a key that unlocks the locked ward. It's supposed to keep the guns and the ammunition separate. So those are the kinds of problems that very often are not discussed enough, I think, in a public discourse like this one, where this is actually very, very good. And also I think that the safety issues are very often are not understood. Clearly what we don't know about the process is what puts us at risk.
Okay. Attorney Rossi, you were saying something.
Yes, I think we have to be careful of oversimplifying the issue here. This is what happens constantly in political circles when you're talking about gun control, and that is constantly actually penalizing the law abiding citizens under the intention of trying to control access to guns. Time after time, we see that every time there is a mass shooting, the knee-jerk reaction is we need more gun control. Well, quite frankly, the people who are going to go through that process, usually the law-abiding people. The people who are not going to go through the 3 days or 5 days background checks and waiting are those people who already have access to guns on the black market or in the streets. So I think we cannot oversimplify this by just saying, give us more gun control, give us more gun control. No, you're going to have to drill down to root cause analysis in these situations, because the people whom are committing these murders have very different backgrounds and very different distinctive characteristics based on race. For example, if you look at most of the mass shootings that we've seen here, whether they're Columbine or school shootings, whether it's in Las Vegas, whether it was the church in South Carolina with Dylan Ruth, whether it was in Arizona with the gentleman who shot at Congressman Gifford, those mass shootings are usually committed by white males. And many times, you can even go to Nicholas, many of these people, many times the guns that they access, the person, their parents or themselves, they would have passed the background check. On the other hand, when we look at the shootings that are committed by our young men, number one, these are usually not mass shootings. It is an anomaly that you see a mass shooting on these scales that have been committed by black males. Our shootings are usually within our own neighborhoods or against our own gang-related shootings or things such as that. So I don't think you can even begin to deal with gun violence by making it a cookie cutter approach. Why do the black males have these guns? Why are the black males shooting each other? Why is there a lack of respect for life to the point where I can kill you just based on the gang that you're in, the block that you live on, the color that you have on, or because you walk over my white shoes? Where does that come from? And that's the drill down that's necessary. I can tell you as an attorney, not only in my private practice, but I also take pro bono cases here in Miami-Dade County for the public defender's office. I've represented many of their clients, and thank God I've never lost one case. I've never played one of those clients out, even though I represented them for free. And I have those conversations that I call my come to Jesus with the clients. I'm representing you for free. I'm getting you off of this for free. Now, what happens after this? What happens to prevent me and this system from having to see you again? So you have to drill down to what is life like for those people at home. Because the more educated you become in general as a Black person, the less likely you're going to be out there doing that because you have too much to lose, right? Even if you don't value your own life, even if you don't value those of others. I am an attorney. I got a bar license to lose. I'm a registered nurse. I have a nursing license to lose. I'm a veteran, I'm a minister. The more affluent that we can become, the more that we can improve the lives of our young children and Black males through education, opportunity, mentorship, and influence, the less likely they are to be idle and associated with the people who have no value of life. So it's a very, very different paradigm depending on the group of people you're dealing with, where they came from, where they are, and where they have to go once you get them through the system the first time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm kind of, this, and I can remember, well, when you could pretty much tell, and maybe I'm being stereotypical, you can pretty much tell the race of a person who committed a crime. But since guns have taken on a new personality, a new life of its own, it's kind of difficult to say who's committing the crime at astronomical rates. I know Black folk don't normally kill in mass shootings. However, the mentality that comes with one picking up a gun has caused a different mindset. Ron, what in your book? I haven't read the entire book, but in your book, is there a discussion about the mentality of those who are carrying the guns now?
Well, very much so. I think that to the points that I think we've been making tonight, clearly I think that the culture of violence stems in large part from a culture of fear. Persons who have fear find various strategies to try to address it. And one, I think it's a maladaptive response, is that if I have a gun, I'm safe. We talk in the book about a really consistent pattern of studies that when you ask persons why they choose to have a gun, many will say they have it for self-protection. Few appreciate when they buy a gun for protection that the gun probably is, and the studies vary, from 20 to 30 times more likely to be used by someone different than them and for some reason other than self-protection. It could be an accident, as I mentioned earlier, somebody cleaning it or hurts themselves. It could be somebody comes to the house, for Thanksgiving dinner, and cousin Joe and next door neighbor Peter get into an argument over the dominoes, and a gun just happens to be there. So when in my book we said a gun is the problem, the reality is very often shootings are opportunistic. The earlier speaker pointed out correctly that very often in certain communities, violence is dynamic, it's interpersonal. We are shooting people who we know, but we perhaps didn't buy a gun to shoot them because we were going to be angry. We were angry in the heat of the moment. So part of the gun being the problem is the over accessibility of guns. I'll get 350 million people, 380 or 90 million guns. If you have a society with less guns available, those shootings would probably be substantially decreased, if not they'd go away totally. Also, because we have very high magazine capacity guns, persons who buy a gun to, go hunting, for example, it's often the argument, I want a gun to hunt. You shoot one bullet at a time to shoot a deer, for example. Or when guns are being bought, a century or 2 centuries ago, as I say in the book, it took 100 seconds to shoot one bullet. A musket, and you had to get it all ready and all that business. Now, many young persons can have a gun that shoots not, 100 seconds one bullet, but 100 bullets in 1 second. These high magazine capacity items. And that's important because one reason we have so much gun violence in society is most people are very poor marksmen. They don't practice. The data shows that for the average law enforcement officer in our society that practices once a month or whatever for their job, they hit about 4 out of 5 stationary targets at 50 feet, which is 80%, and about 2 out of 5 moving targets at 50 feet. Those are people who have been trained and who practice. So the average person who just buys a gun and never practices, they hit even less than that. And that's why they need to shoot so many bullets over such a short period of time and kind of flood the market, so to speak, with bullets. They have a chance to actually hit somebody, let alone to actually hurt them. Few people who get shot with one bullet, unless it's a powerful gun like a rifle at a short distance, die. What kills persons are multiple gunshot wounds. So the reality is those are two components of how the gun violence process happens in the U.S. that leads to more overt violence. But going back to your earlier question, many people buy a gun thinking it's going to protect them, and the data would argue that by and large, guns don't protect most owners of guns. People don't like to hear it, but that's what the empirical data shows pretty clearly.
And I'm a data person. I usually say if we're not keeping data, then data's being kept on us. And so the data that's being kept on us helps proliferate guns into our communities. And I dare say that if you ask anyone in their community, at least here now, I know the law enforcement has enacted technology to be able to identify a gunshot in the community. But if you ask the average person what gun incidents happen in their community in a week, they wouldn't know, if any. And so we don't see it until it happens. And I guess that leads me to this. What makes some communities more high propensity for gun violence than others? Because it can happen in the suburbs as well. I mean, we're not saying this is a black problem. I mean, I heard a lady in Colorado say, what's going on here that this is so prevalent in our community? And I'm sure there's a lot of black communities where it's just as prevalent, just not on that scale. So what makes some communities more prone for that? I didn't want to do a gotcha. I mean, I'm just saying.
I for a few ideas. I think first and foremost, I mentioned the part about persons weaponing up, so to speak, and kind of getting ready. So in more shootings happen in areas where there are a lot more guns. There are a lot more guns, for example, in the west and the south part of our country than in the north central and the northeast from a volume perspective. I think it's also true that very often a person uses a gun as a defense strategy for some kind of conflict or difficulty. And also often, if there are not other kind of strategies in play for persons to manage those issues, they're at risk. Some would argue that some people go to church and there's a spirituality piece. Others would argue that you may go to mental health and discuss it with your therapist. We're struck in psychiatry by the data that has been very consistent throughout the entirety of my 30-year career that when persons die of violence at their hands, of suicide or homicide, especially suicide, half of them have seen a trained professional within 30 days of a violent action like a suicide. And half of the ones who see someone, they'll see somebody who's not a psychiatrist in some other form of healthcare or a case manager or social worker alike. So that does at least portend to this idea that before persons enact a violent action towards someone else, they've thought about it and considered it, and maybe even tried talking to somebody about it. So if we're in a setting where we don't offer a conduit to do so, if there's a lack of mental health services, or if the stigma against mental illness says don't go and talk to your psychiatrist, or psychologist, or nurse, as I was stated earlier, in some communities that may be more at risk, then a person may act out using this demonstrative aspect of violence versus using a non-violent action that may help address some of their emotional and psychological difficulty. I think a couple considerations that are bandied about a lot, I think, in healthcare, but clearly ones that we need to get a better handle on going forward.
Yeah. And Attorney Rossi, how does this translate into your work? Because I'm sure that you come across clients who've seen plenty gun violence and probably needed some therapy and didn't lack it. So how does that play out on your end? because you get to see the another side of the gun violence.
Oh, yes, definitely. Because I wanted to add to those things that were just spoken, the culture of the home and the culture of the community also have major roles to play in this. For instance, I am a veteran, so that means I've shot, rifles, etc., because I was in the Army. My oldest sister is retired Army. All of my cousins are retired Army. I mean, we are a retired military family, yet none of us, although we all know how to use guns, has ever been in jail, has ever used a gun to resolve the situation. Now, I told you earlier that I became an attorney after being a registered nurse for almost 2 decades due to my brother's incarceration. He's the only son, but that was a drug incarceration. That wasn't a violent corporate, conflict or charge. I say that to say that just the presence of guns or the knowledge of guns or even the accessibility of guns alone will not cause the people to go to guns as a first resort or an illegal resort if that is not the culture of your mind or the culture of the home or the environment that you came from or where you live, and it's not as acceptable. So you have to always deal with what is the culture of whom I'm dealing with. And when I say culture, I didn't say race, right? I said the culture. What is the thought process about how they handle conflict? Because then when the person is charged with a crime and they come to me, of course, I'm the advocate for them. My goal, right, is to bring them through this without them being incarcerated, but being found guilty, which thank God I've been successful in doing. But what about the very next time? See, I can get you there. I can get you through the not guilty. I can get you through. I haven't played out a client. They haven't gone on probation. I can fight the fight. But once I'm finished, if your mindset is no different, then you will be back before another attorney or prosecutor in another year or two. So you have to deal with what is the culture of this person that I'm representing? Why did you think that killing someone or pulling a gun was your best answer to this situation? It may be sometimes it's generational, statistical, what we call spiritually right, generational curses, what we call legally statistics. The father was in prison and used guns or was in a gang. The son does it. It just continues to recycle down generations. Other times, again, they've come from a great home. Their parents have done everything right that parents know to do, but their friends all have guns and carry. So the therapy and the counseling, that is a great thing. A lot of times people shy away from that, but I am an advocate of my clients go to counseling, be able to talk with somebody confidentially about what got you to this place. Because it's how do you change gun violence? The same answer as how do you eat an elephant? It's one person, one life, one soul, and one mind at a time.
Great. Uh, and to our audience, I do want to invite you, if you have questions, to please submit your questions. We do not want this to be just a conversation between us. I know with me and Ron and Turner Rousey, you got some big talkers. Bobby's being real quiet, but
Yeah, I am. I am because this is serious.
yeah,
What gets me is gun violence. It extends past the gun, and it's so scary. I see. Absolute says, "Do you believe the media plays a large role in promoting fear and the need to be armed?" That was one question. And another viewer said, when we were talking about availability and guns, and he was saying affordability. So, but that question, anybody want to jump on that one? Do you all believe the media plays a large role in promoting fear and the need to be armed?
Absolutely. and unequivocally. And especially within the last, I would say, year or two. And for me, this is not a political argument. I really could care less if a person is Democrat, Republican, or independent. I don't even try to get into that aspect. But what we have seen in the media more within the last year or two is that more people are openly armed. For example, you see the Proud Boys, they're armed. You see, when people were going to vote, there were armed people coming there. And you had law enforcement saying, well, they're not technically breaking any laws. And so then you have instances where, unfortunately, when we watch the news, there's really no good news on the news. Everything is overkill in regard to morbidity and just an influx of negative information. So people are afraid, and in many cases, rightfully afraid. And there's nothing wrong with having a gun. The gun is not the issue. I have never seen a gun grow two legs and go pull its own trigger.
Mhm.
The person who holds the gun is the issue. What are you buying the gun for? What is your purpose to have the gun? What do you plan to do with the gun? Do you have the mental capacity to really even have a gun in the first place? And do you have the duty to country, to person, to life, and to yourself to know how to righteously and rightfully exercise the power of a gun? So definitely to me, the media plays a fear, and it definitely increases that need or perception that people need to be armed.
Ron?
Well, I certainly agree that the media has an astronomically potent role in this entire problem. Clearly, little people like my mother in Beaumont, Texas, Perry and I are from, I'll say again, is terrified very often about things happening 1,000 miles away, or sometimes further than that. That wouldn't be the case where if you wouldn't know what's happening if you're in Beaumont, Texas, what's happening in California or Maine or Europe or South America. So clearly, I think that the image is that things that are very problematic and bad and harmful and violent are closer to you than they would have been otherwise. I think the other issue that the media, very often now is, I think, a lot more salacious than it has to be. If you look at very often a tracker at the bottom of the television is breaking news. There's always breaking news. So somebody has to outdo the next media agent group to argue that they've got the biggest and the strongest and they got it faster. And then I think that's become counterproductive, I think, in our society. But to me, the biggest issue is the one that we make, and I don't say this tongue in cheek, and I don't mean to be flippant with it, but I call it the Bugs Bunny philosophy. I've been doing it against psychiatry 30 years, and you'd be surprised how often in psychiatry you talk to someone and a young person, and because their chronological age is much greater than the psychological, emotional age, they really have aberrant thought about what's going to happen with a gun. The worst case scenario, I mentioned Bugs Bunny, because your Bugs Bunny gets shot on Saturday, but he's alive and running and playing next Saturday in the cartoons. So it's a very false image. But I had a real case once of an individual who had been shot. And make a long story short, in talking to him for a forensic assessment, he basically stated directly out of his mouth, well, Doc, had I known it was going to hurt to get shot, I wouldn't have been living that life, or gang banging, what the case may be. So many of us probably don't imagine that young people or young adults really fail to appreciate the gravity of the situation. I heard Perry Busby say earlier, what if you're in a place and somebody steps on your white shoes, or the case may be, that person, when they go to the car to get the gun, whether they're thinking that they've been disrespected or they feel they can be punched out or whatever, but they really believe when they walk back into the place with a gun, everything changes. Either you don't pull it and people laugh at you, you disrespect it, or you pull it and you kill somebody and then you may be in prison forever, or you may pull it and they may take it from you and kill you, then you may be harmed or paralyzed or dead going forward, or both people die. I mean, all the options are bad. It's hard to believe in my life I've ever somebody who really thought that when a problem occurred, they're going to go to the car to get the gun or whatever, they're going to come back inside, use the gun or what they're thinking about it, and they're going to go home and life is going to be the same. Who really wants to change every aspect of the tenor of their life because somebody stepped on their shoes, metaphorically? So absolutely, what the media does in its unfortunate way let alone movies that show gratuitous violence. You have to have the explosions, things of that nature. What the media has done, I think, over time has had an impact, an adverse impact, I think, on how we view violence in our society, and very often the gun is a primary tool of that said violence.
Okay, I got a question. Has there been any studies done on the sexual, the male versus female side of gun violence? Has there been a study, and if there has, who perpetrates the use of gun violence more, male or female? And why is that? Is it testosterone, or what is it? What machoism? What is it?
I will. I'm going to leave that psychological study information to the doctor here. But I will say, in the state of Florida, if you just look at the numbers, you will see again there are about 30 something, there are 81,000 inmates as of the last count for 2020 from the Florida Department of Corrections. When you take that and go male versus female, there are about 30 something to 40 something percent, 30 something percent white males incarcerated in Florida, I think about 44, 45% black males. But then when you go down to females, you're looking at 1.9%. I think there are 1,600 and something black females incarcerated in the state of Florida, and about 3,730 something, I believe, white females incarcerated in Florida. So definitely you already see that the number is higher with males than it is with females. They then break down the statistics for you on the basis of violent crimes. And what you will see is that the number is definitely higher with males in the violent crimes, which includes the gun violence that we're discussing tonight, the murders, the manslaughters, your aggravated batteries, kidnappings, things such as that. The numbers are higher exponentially with males when compared to females.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have great data, I think, on this issue, and violence is absolutely a male dominant problem. From an age perspective, you generally see people that so-called minimum one, age 18 to 29. So very often it's a young male dominant problem. And the point I like to be very often about race is that African American women are the group most likely to be victims of gun violence in domestic conflict. So the one group that's most likely to be at risk in domestic violence when they're in a home or visiting relatives where a gun is there are women in general, but particularly African American women. So it's data I think we all should be mindful of, because most people, again, don't tend to think that a gun being there is going to be used to harm them, but circumstances very often get out of control, and because of this easy access and people very quickly going to a gun, some groups I think are more at risk than others. It's a huge point, though, because I think the domestic violence issue increasingly becomes one that in some communities we should be more mindful of to protect, I think, our mothers, our wives, our daughters, etc.
I remember when I worked as a therapist in a juvenile detention center, and I remember taking a class where it was talking about rape and how rape was used as a force of power, and people who did that based upon race. We had more white males that would engage in that type of activity than any other race of people. So how does that sense of power different from gun violence? Are there more black people using gun violence than any other race of people, or is there, or even if it's a correlation or whatever, if it's about power?
Well, clearly, I think, as the earlier speaker said, we recognize that this gun violence occurs in different settings, and in urban communities, we generally tend to see a fair amount more interpersonal violence. Two young men, there's a conflict, very often maybe about money or turf, and guns are produced. But I'm reluctant as a researcher to ever say that this happens more in one community than the other. I think it happens in a different fashion in other communities, and in ways that very often are harder to track. Clearly, access to guns occurs in part because they get to communities, and not many people in some races or genders have access to the large ships to bring the guns or the large, trucks to transport them. So being involved in the gun violence trajectory, I think, is multi-determinant, and many people are engaged. To me, one of its analogies is that although more guns may be used in New York, on the streets of New York, some will argue, well, New York has some of the strongest gun reform laws, and the laws don't work because there's still a lot of gun violence there. But the studies show that the state that produces the most guns is Virginia, and more guns go from Virginia on this pathway to New York, where they're sold illegally and then repackaged, and very often the bump stock is added, and then much more gun violence happens on the streets of these urban cities like New York because of that. So there's a huge interplay in this multi-billion-dollar enterprise. A lot of it, unfortunately, I think is under the table or illicit. Many hands are involved, and I think that our government at the highest level would have to take a national perspective to address so many of the aspects that allow gun violence to perpetuate itself and put so many people, especially boomer people, I think, at risk. That may be beginning with some of the executive actions by President Biden here recently.
Yeah.
I think another factor we have to look at here as well is our community, meaning the Black community, that comes into play is the reluctance of Black people to call the police if we know there are guns and everything in our community because of the fear of what happens when you call the police. So we have a lot of communities, for example, even here in Miami, we have a lot of communities where people are doing drive-by shootings or they're shooting someone. And the communities are small enough that surely somebody knew or would know the perpetrators and know the people who are doing this. And so what happens is every time there's a shooting, then there's some kind of march or protest, and the family who has lost a loved one is crying out to the community. If you know something, say something. Call this line. And my heart goes out to them because you want that family to get that justice. The problem, though, is that a lot of times before the shootings ever happen, people in the community already know who the people are with the guns and who are committing the violence and the crimes. And so there's this internal dilemma. I want to stand up one hand, and I want to stand up for those in my community and, call the police and turn people in. But then there's the other part of that dilemma for the people, which is, but when we call the police into our community, they don't come in to just help out. They don't come in to just curb the violence and use the least restrictive means that they have available. They come in with excessive force. So if I call the police on young Johnny down the street, whom I know committed a crime or has a gun, and I'm asked to come in and arrest him peacefully, that's not going to happen in my community. That's the thought process a lot of times. They're going to come in and they're going to kill our Black children, or they're going to deploy excessive force to the point where they hospitalize our Black children. So those are things that are also running in the mind of the community. Because like I said, as I represent clients, I also have to look at the culture of the specific community. Again, not the race, the culture of the community, where the client came from. Is this a place where police come in unchecked and unfettered and they brutalize Black men and Black people? Because I guarantee you, it's going to be very hard to get people to turn folks in, because the folks are people they grew up with. It's their loved ones, it's their friends.
Yeah.
So you have to deal with the element of how we are treated in the criminal justice system, because it plays a huge role in the commission of crimes, and then me as an attorney, trying to defend them and deal with mitigating and sometimes aggravating factors.
Yeah.
A lot of times I will hear people say, and even social media, we need to have prayer back in the schools. Sign this petition if you want prayer back in the schools. And I always say, I'm not worried about prayer in the schools. I'm worried about prayer in your home. In other words, it's not going to be for the teacher to do. You need to do in your home to establish the correct culture. It can't be for the lawmakers to do what you're going to have to do. When I was a kid, my mom whooped our bottoms. I was afraid. I would have been afraid to do any of
Yeah.
this kind of stuff. But as communities, we're going to have to go back to the old ways in the old days of laying down the law in our own homes, laying down what is acceptable and what is unacceptable, allowing the kids to suffer your consequences when they disobey, to keep them from suffering the law's consequences of being arrested and prosecuted. Send them to counseling. Don't shy away from that. If you know that you cannot get through to your child, that doesn't mean you're a bad parent. You could do everything you know to do, but just like a football coach can get your son to clean his room before you can, that therapist can have that private conversation with that child to help identify things that you can't see. But play the role that you need to play to get your children a whole lifetime of wonderful experiences. I would love to meet you, but I don't want it to have to be because I'm representing you or your child and we're looking at them going away for 5, 10, 15 years. In Florida, the statistics are that the majority population by age in prison is between the ages of 18 to 49. That's 70 something percent of our 81,000 inmates. Those are the most productive and best years of your life. That's when you go to college. That's when you establish a family. That's when you open your business. That's when you do everything. So we have some roles to play. And again, there are so many causes that we have to look at. It's not a cookie cutter.
Yeah. Um, okay, we have another question. A major side effect of lead poison is violent behavior because of its effect of preventing brain development. Should we address this in our community, and if so, how? Um, I We can all look at Flint, and there are many other Flint type conditions, um, and so lead poisoning is one of them. How do we begin to address this, or how?
Well, a lot of folks get exposed to lead poisoning, kids especially by eating, paint off, chipped walls where they live, the so-called pica. And clearly, refurbishing and repainting is a start for prevention, and of course, having access and education of parents and caregivers to not allowing young person to do so, I think is another start. Other ways to prevent violence, though, are behavioral. A lot early today in regards to have some differing strategies, and many kids have not been taught what is at home or in the church or in the school or in the community at the YMCA, what have you. What are some strategies to use, rather than acting out violently? I think there's a lot to be said for this idea that many more lessons are, caught than taught, so to speak. So if persons regularly see others raise their voice and argue or respond violently to conflict and not witness other nonviolent strategies, it's easier, not perfectly predictable, but easier to assume those persons are likely to do the same thing and act out in that type of way. I think it's also true, though, that violence very often is repetitive, and the persons who engage in violent acts are the ones who do it consistently. So those are the ones I think we should actually be much more proactive in our approach, going toward them, going at them, if you will, with normalizing type behaviors, rather than thinking that it's a general construct. If I was a principal of school, for example, and I had 1,000 kids, rather than having general education for all 1,000, which is reasonable and important, it's probably most important to have intense education nonviolent action education for the 100 who engaged in violent actions last year in school before. Those are ones who are much more likely to engage in violent actions going forward, or for their violence to be ramped up and to go from, hand-to-hand combat to using weapons and things of that nature. One of the things that I often like to point out, and I think Mr. Henry mentioned about the book, but the book states that many people very often try to make laws that will prevent those who are mentally ill from having access to guns. And a lot of the fight from groups that are against those laws are that basically the government will theoretically take your guns away. And that actually comes out of this idea that if you go to a psychiatric hospital, one strategy is that the judge can say, well, you can be out of the hospital, but once you've been civilly committed, you cannot actually have a gun. But the reality is, more so than the mentally ill, who are probably 3 to 4% more likely to engage in a violent act towards somebody else than the general population, the three groups of persons who the data shows are most likely to engage in violence toward others are persons who have alcohol in their system, or alcoholic, or alcohol dependent disorder, or abuse. Those have been prior victims of violence, and those prior perpetrators of violence. And really, no state in the country has a law limiting those three groups, or any of those groups, from having access to guns. We really are not following the empirical data that tells us which groups we probably should be targeting more of our preventive efforts and laws that would be focused, I think, on prohibition. We can do better.
And I'm glad you mentioned data. I'm a data person. I love data, and people love to talk about it. How up to date is our data, one, and then secondly, there's a business rule that says you can't fix what you don't measure. And on the IT side, we take it a little further. We say you can't fix what you can't measure, but you can't measure what you don't monitor. I.e., I can't fix it if I don't have empirical data in which to measure that which I have. What are some of the areas that we are missing in terms of calculating or understanding this data better? And how do we, looking at Biden, looking at the executive orders today, they are good on their face. Background checks. But that doesn't really fix a problem. It sounds good. It sounds like we're fixing, but does it really address the problem? And from both of you guys' areas, in terms of what could make your practice better, what data do you miss, or what data kind of helps paint the picture better for you? Well, and should we address those issues?
I would say that.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I don't think that the data is missing as much as the data is not extrapolated across disciplines. So to give a quick illustration, I'll go back to my clinical nursing days when I was a registered nurse on the floor. But when that patient comes in and we've triaged that patient, there's not only nursing that needs to be involved in the treatment and whole recovery of that patient. You need the dietitian to come in and deal with the diet. You need the physician. There may have been other practitioners to whom we had to refer. So if each department was only taking in its data and then only that person was trying to implement the treatment plan, you were going to definitely come up with something that wouldn't work. But the data is there. So I think that the problem is we have so many agencies compiling data, but then they're not sharing and communicating with how do we now all of this data, compile it, and then put something into place that will work.
Yeah.
And then measure.
And I want to push back on that.
So
I want to push back on that because I don't doubt that they are all collecting it, but the data sharing and the picture it produces is not there. And that's the other part.
That's what I said.
Yeah. Because data is only good as the person that's collecting it and then how do we share it? Because again, the forces that
Exactly.
are against us, whether it's political or racial or just straight out profit, they are sharing and collaborating on data because they need it. White supremacists need the
Right.
guns, and the politics need. I mean, the current GOP needs this white nationalist. So it all goes together. And then, so I'm asking, where are we?
And that's what I'm saying. The data is there. You know, for example, let's just go to the court system. The court system has multiple programs. You got the program for veterans when you're arrested. You have the program for substance abusers when you're arrested. You guys, you know, these are different courts, right? That based on the issues, I could take a client through in a criminal matter. Then I have pretrial diversion, and maybe you can send them to anger management. So it's not that there's not data. The problem is people just take this data and without coming together to see how it interacts, to make it an interdisciplinary approach, everybody has a program. So you have a program over here, I have a program over there. They're addressing different components of the issue, but not the person holistically.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens is who's actually monitoring now how effective your program really is across the board. Maybe this person never comes back is never arrested again due to a substance abuse issue. So now your court feels they've had a success, but over here, the person is now arrested again due to another issue. So how are you coming together to put the programs together and then monitor it? Unfortunately, one of the most common measurements is just whether or not the person recycles through the criminal justice system again, the recidivism rate. Well, that's not dealing with the problem because that person goes back out to his or her community, they go back out to his or her home, and they take that same culture back with them, and then violence begets violence, you know, if you will. It becomes a cycle. So the first thing I believe we have to do is we have to get the stakeholders meeting and discussing holistic plans that involve all of the stakeholders as opposed to individualized plans. And then you need to come back with, you know, with the numbers. Unfortunately for us as attorneys, the numbers we always get are there are more Black people incarcerated than others. Black people are more, and this is empirical data. The NAACP, Urban League, many of these social agencies obtain this data and do these studies. Black people will be sentenced more harshly than others. See, we have that. We got that down pat. The question now is, okay, what are we going to do about that problem? And that's why I said earlier, it goes back to the culture. How do I stop him or her from getting into the system in the first place?
Yeah.
What do we do on that end?
Right.
So it requires more of a holistic approach than what is being utilized. Money is being thrown at everything. Even with President Biden's executive order that you mentioned today, where he was focusing on the ghost guns, you know, those unregistered guns, it goes back to what I said at the beginning. The people who are illegally making guns, buying guns, those people aren't going to follow any of the laws that are made. So you got to catch them somewhere else, which is why they feel the need to do this stuff in the first place. They're not going through the background check.
So is gun violence held captive to capitalism?
Well, in my opinion, I think that it's a multifactorial problem. Clearly, capitalism and ability to make a buck is front and center in the line of part of the problem. Many persons can earn, I mentioned it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. I don't think that it's held hostage as much to capitalism, in my opinion, as it is to politics. I think that, as mentioned earlier, we have laws right now. We have technology right now that work better. I know I went through that pretty fast, but one point I like to always repeat, and thank you for the time here, is that, you know, we have technology now, it's called biotechnology, where we could create a law where you couldn't sell a gun in our society, and people buy many guns legally, you know, from a gun show, for example. There's billboards all around the country. It's a gun show, and you can go and buy guns really without any background checks in those settings. It's the biggest loophole, I think, in the entire discussion. But if the gun would only work if I bought it for myself to protect myself and my family, it would only work if my fingerprint was there. It wouldn't work in other settings, which many would argue should substantially decrease the high demand to break into your house and steal your gun. And some folks do now more so than stealing your television set, and then to be able to use it on the street or be able to use it pretty quickly. Even in your own house, very often somebody that you know might use a gun. I get a story earlier where it's a domestic conflict, and Uncle Johnny's having a conflict with Cousin Peter, and they go to arguing over dominoes, and somebody grabs a gun real fast. Well, that's not the one that's trained to work only for you. If you bought it, then it would work in that setting. And very often that gives persons a chance to have a cool down period before an issue. Because so often gun violence is very impulsive and very short period of time between becoming angry and wanting to hurt somebody and shooting to hurt them. The more time we can put in healthcare between initial thought and the action, the less likely the person who's a potential victim will actually die. Those are some strategies we can employ. Thus, I don't think we're fully held hostage to capitalism, but we need to employ some of the strategies that I think are available to limit the problem.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great. Okay, we have one more. Got one more question. We're gonna close it down. John Schaff, Bobby, you want to take that one?
I was about to ask. Oh yeah, John Schaff says, "Where are the funds to pay for therapy? Are our community leaders pondering this?"
I would definitely say yes, depending on where you are. For example, here in Miami-Dade County, we do have specific programs. So I would say, depending on where you are, the first thing you should do is reach out to your government officials to see what is available in your county or your city, because there are quite a few funding programs available for that. The second thing I will say is become active, even more active, I should say, participants in the process of demanding what is needed from your elected officials. You know, every election, what do we see? Everybody comes to our churches. Everybody comes to talk with us and ask us what our problems are and what the issues are in our communities. And then we elect them, we put them in office, and a lot of times we don't hear from them again until they need our votes again. So I say we have to be very active in questioning people, and don't do it along party lines. I don't care what party affiliation you have. When you're coming to me, I know what the issues are. I know what I feel I need in my community, and those are the tough questions. We are to have a gubernatorial election, right? We will be voting very soon for our governor. So as Governor DeSantis runs and whomever will be his opponents, hold their feet to the fire. Ask the tough questions about what you're going to put in place. What is your platform? For your commissioners, your city, your mayors, hold their feet to the fire, even if they're your friends. What are you going to do about the gun violence in our communities? What programs are you going to put in place for those who may not be able to afford therapy? What after school programs are you going to put in place for our children to have something to do? Even though we know it's COVID, they can't get out as much. More what you will see is that people who are idle, these are the people who will be the younger people who are the perpetuators of the gun violence. Even the Florida Department of Corrections annual strategy goes to the fact that even in prison, they don't want to keep people idle, because if they are idle, they are more likely, even in prison, to commit more violent crime. Well, we know as children, we were taught an idle mind is whose workshop? You know, it's the devil's workshop. So hold your officials accountable to put in place what needs to be in place to help the community help itself.
Okay. All right. This has been great. We're running over time. Ron, you all right?
It's been great.
Okay.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Let's begin to wrap it up. Okay. What? 30 seconds. Professor Dr. Ron Kennedy Bailey and Attorney Rossi Williams. In 30 seconds, what would you offer as a way to begin for us as a whole to address this whole gun violence issue?
We there? Did we lose everybody?
No, I'm here. I was going to turn Rossi Williams go first, so I can jump in. I think in 30 seconds, three or four basic things. One, first and foremost, like with most issues, I think there's got to be a national education program or initiative to discuss the facts of gun violence in our society as they exist. I think what tends to happen is people get the wrong information, so there's a narrative crafted by others who may have alternate intentions, i.e. groups that may make a lot of money off selling guns, legal or illegally. Secondly, I think that we certainly have to have a very direct approach at simply decreasing the sheer number of weapons on the streets. I think that the volume of weapons is a tool of a problem that leads to unnecessary dynamic, interpersonal death, I think, in America, and the volume is part of the problem. I mean, we also have to change how guns exist. I think that the militarization of guns, high magazine capacity, and short barrel are problems in the society that I think can't tolerate it in a free and open society the way we are. Otherwise, I think we're going to lose many of our freedoms and ability to live life free of fear. I think those are three key issues that we can address collectively that would help.
Yeah, I would say just a few quick things. Number one, pray but then get up. It's not enough for you to pray. Faith without works is dead. Get off your knees and actually take some action out there for what your prayers are. Number two, set standards in your own home and community for what is acceptable. Number three, get involved on every level. Get involved and make your voice heard. And then finally, number four and number five, hold people accountable. Number four. And number five, measure the outcomes of what you're doing and make changes when necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And I guess as we close, one of the things I must acknowledge is that we cannot let this moment go by without understanding that this happened on our watch. We didn't inherit a gun violent community. It came on our watch. And so we've got to fix this in some way, because this is what we are leashing forward. This is our legacy. Whether we want to talk about all the first African American presidents and first this and first that, this is what we leave in our communities. And so we've got to take this seriously, and it's not someone else's problem. It's not as easy as we've allowed ourselves to do, and that is to just move to a better community and say, leave them niggas over there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are our cousins. These are our family. We know these people. And so it's not them, it's us. What do we do about this problem? I don't think it's all government. I think I think it's just it's been us caught at the crossroads and us caught in the crossfire of us excelling, which we should. We have excelled as a people from 65 to now. I doubt if you can give me a race of people who have excelled in that amount of time as African Americans from Jim Crow to 2020. And so in that excelling, we must ask ourselves at what cost? And we must address the cost.
Okay. All right. Then let me do this. The causes of gun violence extend farther than the weapon held in the hand. Its consequences run far deeper than prison centers and graveyards. It takes our lives. A great man once said, what does it mean to build a better mousetrap? To create a higher quality version of a widely used product. And I said that earlier because it seems to be that we have taken this notion to build a better mousetrap and inventing those weapons that you talked about, Brother Ron. And the consequences extend farther. And that's where you came in, Attorney Rossi. So if by building this better mousetrap, the world is beating down our doors, and we are using it to exterminate life as we know it. So I hope that our listeners have gotten something that they can use from this program. And Perry, as you said, this happened on our watch. So we need to go back and begin to reel it back in, to take over, if you will, what we have created. So I want to thank each and every one of you. I enjoyed it, Brother Ron. I did some research to find out what it meant to be a forensic psychiatrist, man. That was deep. And Attorney Rossi, to know that you have never lost a case and those that you have defended, I know it must give you some form of, you're doing what you're supposed to do, what you were called to do. And we are greatly appreciative of that. So to everybody, I pray that you have a great night, that you be safe, and that we all remember one of the greatest congressmen that we think that walked the halls of Congress, Brother Al.C. Hastings. May you rest in peace. God bless you all, and Godspeed.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Attorney Rossi. Ron, I owe you, man. Thank you, man.
I got to get the bone.
Nice sound on dinner sounds good, in Miami.
Yeah. Shout out to Israel Charles, another Beaumont.
Beaumont, Texas. All good.
No.
2 minutes. Israel Charles, the director of the performing and visual arts at Dillard High School, which is renowned. That's where the world renowned Cannonball Adderley was the band director there. And now to have a guy from Beaumont, man, I tell you, better watch Beaumont.
I'm gonna go. You guys take care. Enjoy it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Attorney Rossi.
Wonderful to meet you. Bobby Henry, wonderful to meet you.
My pleasure, Ron. My pleasure.
Enjoy.